We all carry an old version of ourselves. The one that settled for less. The one that doubted. The one that feared. But here's the truth. That old version of you is not meant to live forever. At some point, you have to let the old you die. Think about it. Every time you try to grow, the old you whispers, "Stay where you are. Don't risk it. Don't change." It's like wearing shoes you outgrew years ago. Tight, uncomfortable, painful, and yet some people never take them off. Why? Because it's familiar. Because change feels like death. But what if that death is actually a rebirth? A snake sheds its skin to survive. If it doesn't, it dies. The same is true for us. We try to carry old habits, old beliefs, old stories, and then wonder why we feel stuck. Your old self was built for survival, but your new self is built for growth. Let me ask you this. How many opportunities have you lost because you listened to the old you? How many dreams have you buried because fear convinced you they were impossible? Maybe the old you said, "You're not good enough. You'll never succeed. People will laugh at you." But guess what? That voice is not your future. It's your past. When you let the old you die, you give birth to courage. You give birth to confidence. You give birth to the version of you that was always waiting. But you can't carry both. You can't step into tomorrow if you're still holding hand with yesterday. Think of a caterpillar. It doesn't just improve. It completely transforms. It becomes unrecognizable. But before it can fly, the caterpillar must dissolve into nothing inside the cocoon. That's terrifying, isn't it? But without that death, there is no butterfly. So I'll ask you, what in you needs to dissolve? What in you must die so that your wings can finally open? Here are some key points related to this. The old you represents limiting beliefs, fears, and habits holding you back. Growth feels uncomfortable because it requires leaving behind the familiar. Like a snake shedding its skin, you must release old versions of yourself to survive and thrive. Fear and self-doubt are voices from the past, not the future. True transformation is not improvement. It's rebirth, like a caterpillar becoming a butterfly. To step into your full potential, you must let the old you die. We all carry an old version of ourselves, like a shadow that never quite leaves. Some people call it a comfort zone, others call it fear. But I like to think of it as a ghost we drag around. It shows up in our thoughts, in our choices, in the way we hesitate. The old you is the voice in your head that says, "Don't try. You'll fail. Stay safe. Be small." And the dangerous part is not that the voice is loud. It's that it sounds familiar. It sounds like you. Imagine for a moment you're standing at the edge of a swimming pool as a child. The water looks deep, colder than you expected. You want to jump, but then you hear your mind whisper, "What if you sink? What if people laugh? What if it hurts?" And so you step back, you watch others dive in, you stay dry. That's how the old self works. It keeps you on the edge of life, watching instead of living. It convinces you that safety is better than growth, that hesitation is better than risk. And at first, it feels protective. But after a while, it becomes a prison. The old you is built from years of repeated fears. Think about all the times you heard, "You're not smart enough," or "Don't dream too big," or "People like us don't get chances like that." These words get planted deep, like roots, until you start repeating them to yourself without even realizing it. And one day you wake up, look in the mirror, and the reflection staring back isn't really you. It's a collection of everyone else's doubts and your own insecurities stitched together. I once heard someone say, "If you argue for your limitations, you get to keep them." And isn't that exactly what the old self does? It argues for the reasons you can't, instead of the reasons you can. You say, "I'd love to start that business, but I don't have the money." You say, "I want to change my life, but it's too late now." You say, "I wish I had their confidence, but that's just not who I am." Every sentence begins with desire, but ends with defeat. That is the signature of the "let me paint a picture." Imagine a man who carries a backpack everywhere he goes. In this backpack are bricks, each brick labeled with a different belief. "I'm not good enough." "I always mess things up." "I'll never be successful." Every day he straps it on and walks through life, shoulders heavy, back aching. He gets used to the weight, so much so that he forgets he's carrying it. People pass him by and ask why he looks so tired, why he never seems to get far. And he shrugs, not realizing the answer is right there on his back. The old self is that backpack. The weight doesn't belong to who you are becoming. It belongs to who you used to be. But because it feels normal, you carry it without question. Think about your own life. How many times have you carried unnecessary bricks? Maybe you believed you weren't talented enough, so you never auditioned. Maybe you thought you weren't attractive enough, so you hid in the background. Maybe you convinced yourself you weren't smart enough, so you didn't apply for the opportunity. And each time, that decision added another brick. Over years, the weight of those bricks begins to define how far you can walk. And soon, you're not walking toward dreams anymore. You're just walking in circles, exhausted by a load you were never meant to keep. What makes this old version so tricky is that it often disguises itself as logic. You'll say, I'm not starting that business. It's not practical. Or, I'm not asking for that promotion. They probably wouldn't give it to me anyway. On the surface, it looks like rational thinking. But underneath, it's fear dressed in reasonable clothing. It's the old you whispering. Stay where it's safe. Don't rock the boat. Don't stand out. And if you listen long enough, it convinces you that survival is more important than growth. But let me ask you, is survival really living? Is staying the same year after year, never daring, never stretching, never becoming truly what you came here for? We weren't born to just exist. We were born to expand, to create, to rise. And the old you knows that. That's why it fights so hard to stay alive. Because the moment you stop listening to it, it dies. And with its death, you are finally free to become. I think about Thomas Edison, who was once told by his teachers that he was too stupid to learn anything. Imagine if he carried that brick forever. Imagine if he let the old version of himself, the one defined by other people's opinions, decide his fate. We wouldn't have the light bulb. We wouldn't have the progress he gave the world. Or think about Oprah Winfrey, who was told early in her career that she wasn't fit for television. If she had believed that voice, if she had clung to that old identity, millions of lives wouldn't have been touched by her presence. The difference between them and the countless others who gave up is simple. They refuse to let the old self dictate. The fool-year-old self is clever. It doesn't just speak, it remembers. It remembers the time you failed a test in school and it whispers, "See, you're not smart." It remembers the time you got rejected by someone you liked and it says, "You're not lovable." It remembers the job you didn't get and it hisses, "You'll never be enough." It collects your scars and plays them back like a broken record, convincing you the future must look exactly like the past. And if you're not careful, you start to believe that record is a soundtrack of your life. But here's the truth. The old you is not your enemy. It's just outdated. It was created in moments when you were smaller, weaker, less aware. It was built to protect you, not to grow you. And like an old operating system on a phone, it crashes when you try to run new programs. You don't hate the phone, you just update it. And that's what you must do with yourself. Update, upgrade, evolve. The old you is every belief that says you can't. The new you is every step that proves you can. And the gap between them is choice. Choice to let go. Choice to stop arguing for your limitations. Choice to put down the backpack of bricks and finally walk unburdened. Because when you let go of that weight, you don't just move faster, you move freer. You begin to see the path ahead not as something to fear, but as something waiting for you. And maybe, just maybe, that's what life has been trying to teach you all along. That you're not stuck. You're not small. You're not broken. You're simply carrying an old version of yourself that has reached its expiration date. And when you decide to set it down, you realize the person you've been waiting to become was always there. Waiting for your growth has a strange way of disguising itself. It doesn't come wrapped in comfort. It doesn't arrive with a gentle smile, and it rarely feels like progress when you're in the middle of it. Most of the time, growth feels like discomfort. It feels like walking into a room where you don't belong yet, like speaking words that sound shaky because your voice hasn't grown into them. It feels like being stretched, like stepping into clothes a size too big, and wondering if you'll ever grow enough to fill them. The truth is, Change always feels like death at first because the familiar part of you is dissolving, and what replaces it hasn't yet found its strength. Think about the first time you tried to ride a bicycle. At first, it was thrilling, the thought of freedom, the idea that you could go further than ever before. But the moment you sat on that seat, hands gripping the handlebars, your legs trembling, fear rushed in. You wobbled, you fell, you scraped your knees. Part of you wanted to throw the bike down and run back to walking, back to the comfort of what you knew. That's exactly what growth feels like in adulthood. We want to change, we want to level up, but when the wobble comes, when the scrape burns, the old self whispers, "See? You're not ready. Go back. Stay safe." And many people do. They return to the old way of living because it feels less painful. But what they don't realize is that every scrape was part of learning balance. Every fall was part of building strength, and every moment of discomfort was shaping them into someone who could ride without fear. Discomfort is the language of transformation. A seed doesn't sprout without first breaking apart. Muscles don't grow without being torn in the process of exercise. Even the ground itself trembles before a new mountain is formed. Nature has been telling us this truth for centuries. Everything worth becoming requires pressure, requires breaking, requires a moment of pain before the beauty appears. And yet, when it happens in our own lives, we panic. We think, this is wrong. I must be failing. But what if failure and growth were the same mask? What if the only difference is whether you stop or whether you keep going? You to choose differently. There's a story about a little chick trying to break free from its shell. It pecks, it struggles, it grows exhausted. From the outside, it looks cruel, like needless suffering. But if someone opens a shell for it, if they make it easy, the chick never develops the strength it needs to survive outside. It's the very act of struggling, of pushing against resistance, that builds the muscles required for flight. Isn't that the same with us? Every challenge, every setback, every uncomfortable moment is building the strength we will need for the life we're asking for. But the old self doesn't understand this. It mistakes pain for punishment, when in truth, pain is preparation. I think of people I've met who stayed in jobs they hated for years because it was secure. They felt the discomfort of stagnation, the quiet ache of knowing they were meant for more, but the fear of stepping into the unknown was louder. They mistook the discomfort of growth for danger, and so they chose the discomfort of decay instead. One man told me once, "At least here I know what I'm suffering with." And that broke my heart, because he didn't realize he was choosing a prison over possibility, shackles over wings. He was trading his future for familiarity. Discomfort is not a signal to turn back. It's a sign you're on the right path. Imagine climbing a mountain. At the bottom, the air is thick, the path is wide, and you're comfortable. But as you climb, the air thins. Your legs burn, your lungs ache, your heart races. Everything in you screams to stop. And yet, if you keep going, if you lean into that discomfort instead of retreating, the summit reveals itself. The view is always there, waiting, but only for those willing to endure the climb. Most people never see it because they turn back when it gets hard, never realizing that the difficulty was the proof they were getting closer. One of my favorite quotes is from Anais Nin, who said, "And the day came when the risk to remain tight in a bud was more painful than the risk it took to blossom." That's the moment of growth. That's the moment when staying the same hurts more than changing. The bud must break open, and that breaking is uncomfortable, but only then can the flower bloom. When you feel the stretch, the fear, the awkwardness, that is not the signal of failure. That is a sign that something new is being born within you. Think about the people you admire most. The athletes, the artists, the leaders. None of them became who they are by staying comfortable. Every one of them embraced discomfort as a teacher. Michael Jordan didn't become the best by only playing games he could win. He practiced until his body screamed, until failure was so familiar it became fuel. J.K. Rowling didn't write Harry Potter in comfort. She wrote in cafes, broken, struggling, rejected again and again, until one yes changed her life. Discomfort was the birthplace of their greatness, and it will be the birthplace of yours. The tragedy is not that growth feels uncomfortable. The tragedy is that most people misinterpret the discomfort and run. They think, This isn't working, when in reality, it is working. The pressure is shaping them. The heat is forging them. The stretch is preparing them for something greater. But because they mistake the pain of transformation for the pain of destruction, they quit before the metamorphosis is complete. They quit in the cocoon, never realizing they were moments away from wings. So I'll ask you, what discomfort are you running from? What conversation have you avoided because it's easier to stay silent? What dream have you shelved because the first steps felt awkward and uncertain? What version of you is still stuck at the bottom of the mountain because the climb looked too steep? If you look closely, those are not signs of failure. They are invitations to grow. The old self will always tell you that growth is dangerous. It will scream when you stretch. It will beg you to turn back. It will insist that the discomfort means you are not ready. But the truth is, the discomfort means you are exactly where you need to be. It means you're breaking the limits of who you were and stepping into who you were meant to become. A snake does something fascinating when it grows. It doesn't expand within its old skin. It doesn't stretch what no longer fits. It sheds. It rubs against rocks, against the earth, sometimes leaving itself vulnerable, nearly blind as its eyes cloud during the process. And yet, without shedding, it cannot live. That old layer, once useful, becomes a suffocating cage if it's held on to too long. Humans, in their own way, are no different. We try to move into new seasons of life while dragging the old skin with us. Old habits, old beliefs, old versions of ourselves that once kept us safe, but now keep us small. And then we wonder why we feel stuck, heavy, unable to breathe in the space of our own lives. Imagine carrying around a coat in the middle of summer. At one time, in winter, it kept you warm. It was your protection. It made sense. But now the season has changed. The sun is hot, and that same coat feels unbearable. You sweat, you grow restless, but because it once saved you, you hesitate to take it off. That's what clinging to the old self looks like. The very thing that kept you safe in the past is suffocating you in the present. Habits that once protected you from hurt are now keeping you from connection. Beliefs that once explained the world are now keeping you from exploring it. Think about someone who was betrayed deeply once. To protect themselves, they built a wall. They learned not to trust too easily, not to open up, not to let people close. And for a time, that wall served them. It kept out the pain. It prevented further wounds. But as the years pass, that wall doesn't just keep out the pain. It keeps out love, friendship, and joy. The wall that once protected them becomes a prison that traps them. Unless they are willing to shed that wall, to release that old skin, they will spend their life safe, but lonely. I once heard someone say, the same boiling water that softens a potato hardens the egg. In other words, the conditions of your past shaped you, but they didn't define what you must remain. The old you is a reaction to old circumstances, but the new you is a choice. If you were hardened once to survive, you don't have to stay hardened forever. You can decide to soften. You can decide to let go. But that means facing the fear of releasing what you've outgrown. And that is no easy task. Habits are the most deceptive skin of all. Maybe you reach for your phone every time you feel lonely. Maybe you silence your ideas in meetings because the old belief says no one will take you seriously. Maybe you eat, shop, or binge watch your way through stress because somewhere in the past, that numbing became your relief. These habits are like grooves in a record. They play the same song over and over again. And because you've heard it so many times, you start to believe it's the only song that exists. But what if your life is meant to play an entirely new melody? You'll never hear it if you keep replaying the same track. Shedding an old habit feels painful, but only because the body is addicted to its rhythm. Once the silence comes, space is created for S-beliefs are another layer of skin. A child who grows up being told they are average, ordinary, maybe even not good enough, carries those words into adulthood like scars invisible to the eye. They take jobs beneath their potential. They settle in relationships where they are undervalued. They shrink in rooms where they should stand tall, all because of an old belief etched into their skin. You are not worthy, but beliefs are not facts. They are stories we repeated until they felt like truth, and stories can be rewritten, but only if we are willing to let the old narrative die. Think of the story of Nelson Mandela. For 27 years, he lived in a prison cell. He could have let those years write the story of his life. Bitter, broken, forgotten. But fear has a clever way of disguising itself as truth. It doesn't shout. It whispers. It takes the voice of the past and convinces you it belongs to the future. That's why when you try something new, the first thing you hear is encouragement, but a list of reasons why you'll fail. You remember the test you didn't pass in school, and the old self whispers, "See, you're not smart enough." You think about starting a business, and suddenly the memory of losing money years ago echoes, "You're terrible with risk." You dream of love, but the rejection from someone long gone sneaks back. "You'll only get hurt again." These aren't predictions. They're recordings from a life you've already lived, a history lesson replayed so many times it starts to sound like prophecy. But the truth is, fear has no knowledge of the future. It only borrows evidence from the past. There's a line I once read, "Fear is a lie with good memory." And isn't that exactly what it feels like? Fear never reminds you of the moments you succeeded. It doesn't show you the times you were brave and it worked out. It only drags up the memories of your lowest points and paints them across your tomorrow as if they are certain. The old you clings to those reminders because it wants to protect you. It says, if you never try again, you'll never hurt again. It believes it's keeping you safe. But what it's really doing is locking you in a cage built out of old failures. Think about a child learning to walk. They fall dozens, maybe hundreds of times. Their little legs buckle, they tumble, they bump their heads. Imagine if, after the 10th fall, they thought, "That's it, walking isn't for me. I keep failing, so clearly I'll never succeed." You'd laugh at the thought, because you know the falling is not proof of incapability. It's proof of progress. And yet, as adults, that's exactly what we do. We try once, twice, maybe 3 times, and the old voice whispers, "Stop, this isn't who you are." So we quit. We misinterpret the stumble as a verdict instead of a step. I knew a man once who dreamed of being a speaker. He had so much passion, so many ideas, but the first time he stood on stage, his voice cracked, his palms shook, and he forgot half of what he wanted to say. People in the audience whispered, some even chuckled, and that humiliation etched itself deep. For years after, every time he thought about speaking again, that memory rose up like a ghost. His old self whispered, "Remember how bad it felt? Don't do it again." And so he stayed silent, convincing himself he wasn't cut out for it. But here's the thing, every great speaker has a first speech, and most of them were terrible. The difference is some people let the old version of themselves be the final chapter, while others allow it to just be the messy beginning. Fear paints the past onto the canvas of the future, but courage refuses to let yesterday decide tomorrow. Oprah once said, "Failure is another stepping stone to greatness." She was fired from her first job in television and told she wasn't fit for broadcasting. If she had let that old wound dictate her future, the world would never have seen the empire she built. Her past didn't disqualify her, it prepared her. And that's the truth fear never tells you. Every mistake, every rejection, every failure is not a forecast of more to come. It's evidence you tried, you dared, you stepped outside the safe zone. Sometimes, the old you will even borrow other people's voices to keep you small. Maybe you grew up hearing a parent say, "You're too sensitive." Maybe a teacher told you, "You'll never amount to much." Maybe a partner once sneered, "No one will ever love you like I do." Those words dig deep, and over time, you begin to repeat them to yourself until they sound like your own. That's the cruel trick of fear. It doesn't always sound like an enemy. Sometimes it sounds like your inner narrator, logical and certain. But just because a voice is familiar doesn't mean I remember a woman who wanted to write a book. She filled notebooks with ideas, characters, fragments of chapters, but she never published. Why? Because years ago, someone laughed at one of her essays. That single moment of ridicule became the anchor holding her down. She told herself, "I'm not a real writer. People will laugh again." And yet, every time she spoke her stories aloud, people leaned in, captivated. The evidence was clear. Her gift was real. But her old self wouldn't let her see it, because the past had planted a seed of fear. The saddest part is that someone else's careless words can sometimes live longer in us than our own dreams. The old self is stubborn. It insists that the pain of yesterday is proof that tomorrow will look the same. But life is not a loop unless you make it one. Just because you fell once doesn't mean you'll always fall. Just because you lost once doesn't mean you'll always lose. Just because someone didn't believe in you doesn't mean you aren't worth believing in. The past may shape you, but it does not seal you. The only way it becomes your future is if you hand it the pen and let it keep writing. There's a powerful image I can't forget. A prisoner who's been behind bars for decades is finally released. He walks out into freedom, but instead of embracing it, he stays close to the prison walls. He doesn't know how to live without the cage. The world feels too big, too uncertain. That's what it's like when you live by the old you's voice. You are free to change, free to become, free to walk into the life you want. But the comfort of old pain feels safe in the risk of new possibility. And so you hover by the walls, never realizing the gate has been open all along. Fear is not prophecy. Fear is memory dressed in disguise. It's the past knocking on the door of your future, hoping you'll mistake it for truth. But if you pause, if you breathe, if you remember that courage doesn't mean the absence of fear, but the refusal to obey it, then you'll see fear for what it really is, an echo, not a command. The old you will always try to remind you of who you were. But it's your choice every single day to remind yourself of who you are becoming. It's true, he shed that skin. He walked out not as a transformation is a strange thing. It doesn't ask for permission. It demands surrender. When a caterpillar enters a cocoon, it doesn't simply grow wings and walk out improved. It dissolves. Its very body breaks down into a kind of soup, losing the form it once knew, dissolving into what looks like nothingness. It's a violent process in its own way, messy, uncertain, terrified if the caterpillar could comprehend it. But out of that dissolution comes something extraordinary. A creature that once crawled, limited to ground, emerges with wings capable of touching the sky. And yet, most of us want the wings without the cocoon. We want transformation without death. We want to keep our old selves intact while somehow stepping into a new version of life. But it doesn't work that way. Think of it like moving into a new home. If you try to carry every piece of old, broken furniture, every box of clutter, every object you no longer use, the new space won't feel new at all. It will feel cramped, chaotic, suffocated by things that no longer belong. The beauty of a new home only appears when you let go of the unnecessary, when you decide that not everything gets to come with you. Transformation works the same way. Not everything from your past gets to move into your future. Some things, old habits, old beliefs, old versions of yourself, have to stay behind. But letting go is hard because the old self is familiar. The caterpillar might not know the sky, but it knows the leaf beneath it. It knows the rhythm of crawling, the taste of the green it chews every day. To give that up for an unknown form is frightening. That's why most people settle for improvement instead of transformation. They make small changes while holding tightly to their old identity. They go to the gym, but still call themselves lazy. They chase success, but still secretly believe they're unworthy. They practice courage, but still define themselves by fear. And in doing so, they miss the metamorphosis. They become better caterpillars, but never butterflies. Real transformation requires you to dissolve who you thought you were. It asks you to stop saying, "This is just who I am," and instead ask, "Who do I need to become?" That's not easy because it feels like betrayal. Betrayal of the old self who carried you this far. Betrayal of the voices that told you who you were supposed to be. Betrayal of the comfort that whispers, "Don't change. Stay the same." But the truth is, the old self did its job. It got you here, and now it must step aside. Because survival and transformation are not the same thing. I think a man who had always been known as the quiet one, the shy one, the one who blended into the background. For years, he avoided attention, played it safe, lived small. But deep inside, he longed to lead, to speak, to inspire. And when opportunity came, when life presented him the chance to step onto a stage, he froze. His old self whispered, "You're not a speaker. You're the quiet one. Remember?" And in that moment, he realized something powerful. The version of him that was shy wasn't who he truly was. It was who he had practiced being, and practice can be unlearned. To step into the life he wanted, the shy self had to dissolve. He had to enter his own cocoon, endure the discomfort of breaking apart, and trust that the wings would appear on the other side. That's what makes transformation so different from improvement. Improvement lets you keep your old label and just shine it a little. Transformation tears the label off completely and replaces it with something unrecognizable. And that's scary because other people notice. They'll say, "You've changed." And for some reason, those words are often spoken like an accusation. But isn't that the point? You were never meant to stay the same. No one celebrates a caterpillar for crawling a little faster. They celebrate when it transforms, when it becomes what it was destined to be all along. But the cocoon stage is the hardest. That's the stage where nothing makes sense, where you feel like you're losing yourself, where the old skin no longer fits, but the new one hasn't formed. It's the in-between, and it can feel like death. Maybe you've been there. Maybe you're there now. The job you once clung to feels unbearable, but the new opportunity hasn't arrived. The relationship that once defined you has ended, but the new chapter hasn't opened. The old self is gone, but the new self hasn't yet been born. That space is where most people quit. They claw at the cocoon, trying to go back to crawling, because at least crawling made sense. They don't realize confusion is necessary. The darkness is part of the design. The breaking apart is the only way forward. A story that always strikes me is out of the phoenix, the mythical bird that burns itself into ashes before being reborn. Fire is painful. Ashes look like an ending. But out of that destruction comes a creature more radiant than before. That myth has lasted centuries because deep down we recognize it as truth. Something in us must burn for something greater to rise. That burning is not the end. It is the beginning. Look at artists, innovators, leaders. Many of them had to let their old selves die to step into their true calling. Steve Jobs was once fired from Apple, the very company he helped create. To the old self, that looked like failure, humiliation, an ending. But in that cocoon of rejection, he transformed. He returned years later not as the same man, but as someone capable of leading Apple into becoming one of the most influential companies in the world. The firing wasn't the end. It was the cocoon. Or take someone like Maya Angelou. She began life silenced, abused, carrying pain so deep that she stopped speaking for years. The old self she carried was one of trauma and silence. And yet, from that silence, she transformed. She emerged as a voice so powerful it echoed across generations. Her poetry, her presence, her words, they were wings born from the cocoon of pain. She did not become slightly improved. She became unrecognizable compared to where she began. So when people say transformation is beautiful, they're only half right. Transformation is terrifying before it's beautiful. It demands you let go of who you were, even when you don't yet know who you'll be. It demands you trust the process, even when all you see is darkness. It demands you die to the old story so that the new story can be written. That's why so few people experience it fully, because it requires a kind of courage that feels like madness. To willingly dissolve into nothing and hope that wings will appear is no small leap of faith. But the truth is, the wings were always coded inside you. The butterfly was always hidden within the caterpillar. The fire was always meant to birth the phoenix. Transformation isn't about becoming something you're not. It's about becoming what you always were beneath the old skin. And that's why the old you cannot survive the process. It wasn't built to fly. It wasn't built to carry you where you're going. It wasn't built to hold the weight of your destiny. The old you was necessary for yesterday, but tomorrow demands something more. And though the cocoon is dark, though the fire is hot, though the letting go feels like death, what waits on the other side is life. Not the life of the caterpillar crawling in the dirt, but the life of the butterfly rising into the sky. And isn't that where there comes a moment in every life where a choice presents itself so quietly that most people don't even notice it? It isn't accompanied by flashing signs or trumpets in the sky. It doesn't announce itself with fireworks. Instead, it whispers, a faint tug inside your chest that says, "You don't belong here anymore." Maybe it's a job that once gave you security, but now feels like a cage. Maybe it's a relationship where the love has long faded, leaving only comfort and habit. Maybe it's a version of yourself you've worn like an old coat, familiar, heavy, but no longer keeping you warm. And in that whisper is an invitation. Let go. Step into the unknown. Step into who you are becoming. But most people hesitate. They grip tighter, because the unknown feels like a storm, and the familiar feels like shelter, even if the roof is leaking and the walls are crumbling. Letting the old you die is not just about endings. It's about making space for beginnings. Imagine carrying a glass of water, filled to the very top. If someone tries to pour in something fresh, what happens? It spills, it overflows, it makes a mess. That's what life is like when we refuse to empty ourselves of the old. We say we want more joy, more growth, more opportunities, but our hands are already full. The universe cannot give us new blessings when we're clinging with white knuckles to outdated versions of ourselves. To receive, we first have to release. But release is terrifying because it feels like loss. When people say, I feel lost, what they really mean is, I let go of what I knew and I haven't yet found what comes next. That space between is where courage lives. Consider the story of the trapeze artist. To fly through the air, they must first let go of the bar they're holding. There's a suspended moment where they are in midair, nothing beneath them, nothing to cling to, just empty space. It looks like danger, but in truth, it's freedom. Only by letting go of the first bar can they grasp the next. Only by embracing that terrifying in-between can they complete the arc of their flight. And isn't life exactly like that? Think of someone who stayed in a toxic relationship long past its expiration date. They knew it was draining them, suffocating their spirit, dimming their light. Yet the fear of loneliness was louder than the hope of love. So they stayed. They rationalized. They clung to the old self who tolerated less than they deserved. But the moment they finally let it end, something miraculous happened. The grief was sharp, yes, but in that grief was clarity. And slowly, with space created, they found themselves attracting connections rooted in respect, kindness, and authenticity. It was as if the universe had been waiting for them to clear Thor picture the entrepreneur who worked tirelessly at a business built on who they were 10 years ago. Back then, the dream fit. It was bold, it was exciting, it was their path. But over the years, it became a burden. The passion drained, the fire dimmed, and what once felt alive now felt like chains. Still, they clung to it because of the sunk cost. I've invested too much to walk away now. But here's the truth. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is burn the bridge to the old self so there's no way back. That entrepreneur finally closed a business, grieving the death of that dream. And yet, in the ashes, a new vision emerged. One that aligned not with who they were, but with who they had become. That is a secret people often miss. Letting go is not about weakness. It is about alignment. The old you is right for an old season. But life is made of seasons, and each one demands a different version of you. You don't wear a winter coat in summer, not because the coat is bad, but because it no longer matches the weather. In the same way, the old self is not wrong or broken. It's simply outdated. To carry it forward is to suffer in heat with unnecessary layers. And yes, there will be people who resist your transformation. They will try to hold you to the version of yourself that made sense to them. They'll say, you've changed, as though it's a crime. But maybe the real crime is staying the same when everything in you is calling for growth. You don't owe anyone the old version of yourself just because they're more comfortable with it. You owe yourself the courage to live aligned with who you are now. I once heard someone say, when the pain of staying the same becomes greater than the fear of change, that's when transformation begins. That struck me deeply because it explains why so many people wait until they're broken before they finally let go. They wait until the job destroys their health, until the relationship shatters their soul, until the old self suffocates their spirit. But what if we didn't wait until rock bottom? What if we trusted the whisper before it became a scream? What if we had the courage to step out of the old not because it's unbearable, but because we know something greater is waiting? The act of letting the old you die is like pruning a tree. To the untrained eye, pruning looks cruel. Branches are cut away, leaves stripped, growth seemingly undone. But the gardener knows what others do not. Those cuts are not punishment. They are preparation. By removing what no longer serves, the tree can grow stronger, taller, fuller. And so it is with us. The endings, the deaths of old selves, the painful goodbyes, they are pruning moments. They prepare us for growth we cannot yet see. And here's the most beautiful part. Every time you let go of the old, the new you doesn't emerge as a stranger. It emerges as someone you've known all along. The child in you who once dreamed without limits, the voice inside you that whispered for more, the light in you that refused to be extinguished. Those parts rise to the surface when the clutter of the old falls away. Transformation isn't about becoming someone else. It's about unbecoming everything you're not, so that you can finally see who you always were. So maybe the question isn't, what will I lose if I let go of the old me? Maybe the question is, what will I never discover if I don't? Because clinging to the old self might feel safe, but it robs you the flight, the freedom, the future waiting just beyond the leap. And the moment you trust that whisper, the moment you release the bar, the moment you step out of the worn-out skin of yesterday, something extraordinary happens. You find that the unknown isn't empty at all. It's filled with possibility. And it was waiting for you all along. Let me leave you with this. Every single one of us has a choice to keep dragging the weight of who we were, or to step boldly into who we're meant to become. The old you has had its time. It carried you this far. It taught you lessons. It gave you survival. But it is not the one that will give you freedom. Don't wait until the pain forces you. Don't wait until life breaks you. Don't wait until the whisper becomes a scream. Choose now. Choose to release. Choose to trust the unknown. Because every second you cling to the past, the future slips further from your grasp. And every second you let go, you create space for miracles you can't yet imagine. Let the old you die. Let the fear die. Let the excuses die. Let the version of you that settles, that shrinks, that doubts, let it die. And watch what rises. Watch the strength. Watch the clarity. Watch the life you were always meant to live. The graveyard is full of people who never became who they could have been because they held on too long. Don't be one of them. So when you walk out of here today, walk lighter, walk freer, walk into the fire of change with open hands. Because the death of the old you is the birth of the real you. And that, my friends, is the only death we're celebrating. The old you served a purpose. It got you this far, but it cannot take you further. So bury your excuses, bury your doubts, bury the old story that says you can't, and let the old you die, so the real you can finally live. Your support means everything. If this resonated with you, please like, share, and subscribe.